The steel blade shattered with a sound like a dying scream, fragments scattering across the marble floor of the great hall while Thomas Jameson felt his soul break along with it. His commanding officer held the hilt and the jagged remnants of what had once been his knightly sword, the weapon he had carried for 7 years of faithful service to the crown, and let the pieces fall from his hands with deliberate contempt. The insignia was torn from his chest next, the golden wolf emblem that marked him as a knight of the realm. And Thomas stood there in his ceremonial armor, feeling more naked than if they had stripped him completely bare. They accused him of cowardice, of abandoning his post during the border skirmish with the northern tribes. But the truth was far more complicated, and no one wanted to hear it. He had refused to slaughter the orc refugees who were fleeing through the pass, women and children mostly, and his captain had called it dereliction of duty. Now he was nothing, just a disgraced soldier with nowhere to go and no prospects ahead of him. The knights he had once called brothers turned their backs as he walked from the hall, and Thomas felt the weight of their judgment like stones piled upon his shoulders. He had 30 silver coins in his pouch, the remains of his last pay, and the clothes on his back. Everything else belonged to the order, even the horse he had ridden for 3 years. They let him keep his travel cloak and his boots, a mercy that felt more like mockery. The capital city held nothing for him now, so Thomas started walking south toward the frontier lands where questions were fewer, and the past mattered less than what a man could do with his hands. It took him 2 weeks of hard travel, sleeping in ditches and buying stale bread from village bakers who looked at him with suspicion. His armor he sold piece by piece to pay for food and lodging, until all that remained was the underlayer padding and his basic clothing. By the time he reached the border territories, he looked like any other drifter, sunburned and hollow-eyed, and carrying the kind of weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. The frontier was a hard place, all rocky soil and stubborn trees, where humans carved out farms from land that had belonged to orc clans for generations. The conflicts here were constant and bitter, skirmishes and raids that never quite escalated to full war but never truly found peace either. Thomas walked through settlements where every third building was fortified, where children played within sight of walls topped with sharpened stakes. He took odd jobs where he could find them, his sword training translating poorly to farm labor, but his strength still worth something. He mucked stables, hauled lumber, dug wells, and never stayed anywhere long enough for questions to start. It was in a trading post called Copper Fork that he heard about the isolated homestead looking for protection. The posting was old, yellowed parchment tacked to the message board beside notices about missing livestock and warnings about orc movements in the eastern hills. The writing was crude but clear, offering room and board in exchange for guard work. No questions asked about the past. Thomas pulled the notice down and asked the trading post owner for directions. "You don't want that job," the owner said, a grizzled man with more scars than teeth. "Place is owned by an orc. Young female, lives alone out past Stony Creek. People around here don't bother with her and she don't bother with us." "The posting says protection work," Thomas said carefully. "What does an orc need protecting from?" The owner shrugged. "Other orcs mostly. She's an outcast from her clan, or so the stories go. Sometimes human troublemakers get ideas about burning her out, claiming the land. She's put up that notice 3 times now and no one's taken it. You'd be living with an orc, eating orc food, taking orc orders. Ain't natural." Thomas folded the notice and put it in his pocket. He had been stripped of his rank, exiled from his order, and reduced to begging for work in towns that treated him like a vagrant. Natural or not, he needed shelter and purpose, and he was in no position to be particular about either. The homestead was a half-day's walk into the hills, following a creek that ran clear and cold between stands of pine and oak. The land was better here than Thomas expected, with actual soil instead of just rock and scrub. He saw evidence of careful cultivation, terraced fields built into the hillside planted with root vegetables and grain. A small orchard of apple trees grew in a protected hollow, the fruits still green but promising. The house itself was sturdy, built from stone and timber with a slate roof that would keep out the weather. A barn stood nearby, sized for a few animals, and Thomas could see a goat pen and a chicken coop. Smoke rose from the chimney, and he caught the scent of something cooking. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty, aware that showing up unannounced at an isolated homestead was a good way to get shot. He called out when he was still 50 paces away, his voice carrying across the yard. "Hello to the house. I am here about the work posting. I mean no harm." The door opened and she emerged, and Thomas felt his breath catch despite himself. She was an orc, undeniably, with the green skin and pointed ears that marked her kind. But she was young, probably close to his own age of 25, and there was a delicacy to her features that surprised him. Her tusks were small, barely jutting past her upper lip, and her build was strong but not massive like the orc warriors he had faced in battle. She wore practical clothing, a simple dress of undyed wool with an apron over it, and her dark hair was pulled back in a thick braid. Her eyes were amber, bright and intelligent, and they studied him with obvious wariness. "You are human," she said, her voice carrying an accent that rounded her consonants and gave her words a rhythmic quality. "You came about my posting." "Yes," Thomas said, stopping at a respectful distance. "I am looking for work and you are looking for protection. I can handle myself in a fight and I am willing to work hard." She looked him over, taking in his worn clothing and the way he stood, the fighter's balance that no amount of hardship could quite erase. "You have training. Military." "I was a soldier," Thomas said, which was true enough. "I know how to use weapons, how to watch for threats. I can do other work too, whatever needs doing around a homestead." Why would a trained soldier want to work for an orc? Her tone was flat, challenging. "Why would you come all the way out here for room and board when you could find better pay in the settlements?" Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Because the settlements do not want me, and I need a place to stay. You need someone who can fight and is not afraid to. Seems like we might help each other." She was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that felt like she was reading the truth directly from his thoughts. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "My name is Grukka," she said. "This is my land earned through my own work, and I will not have it taken from me. If you stay, you will follow my rules. You will respect my home. You will not bring trouble here, and you will not spread word about me in the settlements. In return, you will have a place to sleep, food to eat, and I will pay you what I can when I have coin. Is this acceptable?" "It is," Thomas said. "My name is Thomas Jameson. I give you my word I will do right by you." "Words are cheap," Grukka said bluntly. "I will judge you by your actions. Come, I will show you where you will stay." She led him to the barn, which was cleaner and better maintained than some inns Thomas had stayed in. There was a loft above the animal stalls, accessible by a sturdy ladder, with fresh straw for bedding and a small window that let in light and air. A few empty crates could serve as storage, and the space was weatherproof and private. "You will eat dinner with me in the house," Grukka said. "Breakfast and lunch you can take from the stores, but evening meal we share. That way I can see you are still alive and you have not run off." There was no humor in her voice, just practical assessment. "That seems fair," Thomas said, setting down his small pack. "Is there work you need done today?" Grukka looked surprised, as if she had not expected him to be willing to start immediately. The fence on the eastern pasture needs repair. Posts are rotting and the wire is loose. Goats have been getting out. Show me where the tools are, and I will handle it. She brought him to a work shed that held a surprising array of well-maintained equipment. Thomas selected what he needed and headed to the eastern pasture, aware that Grukka was watching him go with an expression he could not quite read. He found the fence easily enough, and she had not been exaggerating about its condition. He spent the rest of the afternoon pulling rotting posts, digging new holes and restringing wire, working until his hands were raw and his shoulders ached. It felt good to do something productive, to have a purpose even if it was just mending a fence on an isolated homestead. When the sun started dropping toward the horizon, he returned to the shed to clean and store the tools properly. He could see Grukka working in her garden, pulling weeds with efficient movements, and he headed to the well to wash the worst of the dirt off before dinner. She called to him as he was drying his hands. "Come inside. Food is ready." The interior of the house was cozy and surprisingly comfortable, with woven rugs on the floor and curtains at the windows. The furniture was handmade but solid, built to last. A large hearth dominated one wall, and the table was set for two. The food was simple but plentiful, a stew thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, fresh bread, and spring water. Thomas waited until Grukka sat before taking his own seat, and they ate in silence for several minutes. "The fence is finished," Thomas said finally. "I replaced 6 posts and restrung the whole eastern section. It should hold now." Grukka nodded, tearing off a piece of bread. "You work well. Better than I expected from a human who shows up desperate." "I need this to work," Thomas said honestly. "So I am going to do my best." "Why do the settlements not want you?" Grukka asked bluntly. "What did you do?" Thomas considered lying, but something about her direct gaze made him want to tell the truth. "I was a knight. I disobeyed orders during a military action because I thought those orders were wrong. They stripped my rank and broke my sword, and now I am nobody." "What were the orders?" "To kill orc refugees who were fleeing through a mountain pass. Women and children, mostly. They were not armed, they were not attacking anyone, just trying to get away from tribal conflicts up north. My captain said they were enemies regardless and should be eliminated. I refused." Grukka had gone very still, her amber eyes locked on his face. "You refused to kill orc children." "I refused to kill anyone who was not trying to kill me," Thomas said. "I did not become a soldier to slaughter refugees, so they called me a coward and destroyed everything I had worked for, and now I am here." She was quiet for a long time, and Thomas could not read her expression. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "That took courage, more courage than swinging a sword. It cost me everything," Thomas said with a bitter laugh. "Perhaps," Grukka said. "Or perhaps it cost you the things that did not matter, and now you have a chance to find what does. Time will tell." They finished the meal in more comfortable silence, and when Thomas offered to help clean up, Grukka accepted without argument. He washed the dishes while she put away the remaining food, and the domesticity of it felt strange and grounding at once. When everything was tidy, Grukka walked him to the door. "Tomorrow we will work on clearing the north field," she said. "I want to plant winter wheat, but there are too many rocks and roots. It will be hard labor." "I can handle it," Thomas assured her. "We will see," Grukka said, but there was less skepticism in her voice than before. "Sleep well, Thomas Jameson. You as well, Grukka." He climbed to the barn loft and made himself a bed in the straw, using his cloak as a blanket. The night sounds of the countryside surrounded him, crickets and distant owls and the soft movements of the animals below. For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt like he might have found a place to land, however temporarily. He fell asleep thinking about the orc woman who had taken a chance on a disgraced knight, and wondering what had driven her to this isolated existence. The days fell into a rhythm that Thomas found unexpectedly satisfying. He rose with the dawn and helped Grukka with the morning chores, feeding animals and checking fences and hauling water. They worked side by side to clear the north field, pulling rocks and digging out stubborn roots, breaking up the packed earth to prepare it for planting. It was back-breaking labor, but Grukka worked as hard as he did, never asking him to do anything she would not do herself. They spoke little during the work, saving their breath for the effort, but the silences were not uncomfortable. Lunch was usually simple: bread and cheese and whatever vegetables Grukka pulled from the garden. Thomas discovered that she made excellent cheese from goat milk, sharp and creamy, and her bread was far better than anything he had eaten in the settlements. She had a skill for cooking that transformed basic ingredients into satisfying meals, and he found himself looking forward to dinner each evening. It was during these evening meals that they began to actually talk, sharing bits and pieces of their histories. Grukka told him about growing up in an orc clan to the east, one of the larger tribes that held territory in the mountain valleys. She had been expected to become a warrior like her mother and sisters, but she had never felt the calling for it. Instead, she loved growing things, working the earth, creating rather than destroying. Her interest in farming had been seen as weakness, especially for a female who was supposed to be fierce and proud. The final break came when she argued against a planned raid on a human settlement, saying that the clan should focus on their own survival rather than perpetuating the cycle of violence. "They called me human lover," Grukka said, staring into her cup of tea. "Accused me of being corrupted, of betraying our ways. My own mother said I brought shame to our family, so I left. I came here to unclaimed land, filed for a homestead with the Human Territorial Office, and started building this life. That was 3 years ago. You regret it?" Thomas asked. "Some days," Grukka admitted. "I miss my younger sister. I miss the festivals, the songs, the sense of belonging to something larger. But I do not miss the constant preparation for war, the hatred that poisoned everything. I do not miss being told I was wrong for wanting peace." She looked at him directly. "You understand this, I think." "I do," Thomas said quietly. "I thought I was fighting for something noble, protecting people, serving justice. But too often the orders were about cruelty disguised as strength, about causing suffering because we could. When I finally said no, I realized I had been complicit in things I was not proud of. Losing my rank hurt, but maybe I needed to lose it to find out who I actually am." "And who are you?" Grukka asked. Thomas considered the question carefully. "I am still figuring that out. But I know I would rather be here, doing honest work with someone who treats me fairly, than back in that hall wearing armor and pretending I was honorable." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared experience and shared values. Grukka smiled, just a slight upturn of her lips, but it transformed her face, and Thomas felt his heart do an unexpected flip in his chest. He pushed the feeling away, reminding himself of the vast gulf between them, the impossibility of what he was beginning to feel. The work continued through the following weeks. They finished clearing the north field and planted the winter wheat, working from dawn to dusk to get the seeds in before the weather turned. Thomas repaired the barn roof, replaced rotting boards in the chicken coop, and built a better gate for the goat pen. Grukka taught him about the various plants in her garden, which ones needed more water, which ones attracted beneficial insects, how to recognize when vegetables were ready to harvest. He learned that she traded her surplus produce and cheese with a few trusted contacts in the nearest settlement, people who were willing to do business with an orc, because her goods were superior to anything else available. "They do not like me," Grukka explained as she wrapped cheese rounds in cloth for trade, "but they like my cheese and my vegetables, so we maintain a business arrangement, cold but functional." "Do they ever give you trouble?" Thomas asked. "Sometimes. Usually just words, insults shouted from a distance. Twice in 3 years it escalated to actual threats. The first time, a group of young men came out here drunk, talking about burning me out. I shot one of them in the leg with my crossbow and the others dragged him away. The second time, a traveling merchant tried to force his way into my home. I broke his arm and took his horse. He complained to the settlement authorities, but they told him he was lucky I did not kill him for trespassing." Thomas felt a cold anger settle in his gut. "If anyone comes here looking for trouble while I am around, they will regret it." Grukka looked at him with an unreadable expression. "You would fight humans to protect an orc." "I would fight anyone to protect someone who has shown me kindness," Thomas said firmly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You have treated me with respect and fairness. That matters more than species." "You are a strange human, Thomas Jameson," Grukka said softly. "I have been called worse," Thomas replied, and was rewarded with another of those rare smiles. As autumn deepened and the air grew crisp, Thomas found himself settling into the homestead in ways he had not anticipated. He knew the rhythms of the animals, which goat was likely to try to escape, which chickens laid the most eggs, the temperament of the 2 draft horses Grukka kept for heavy work. He knew which tools needed sharpening, which fence sections required regular checking, where the water ran cold and clear in the creek. He knew that Grukka liked to work in the garden in the early morning when the air was still cool, that she sang while she cooked in a language he did not understand but found beautiful, that she always checked the eastern horizon before bed as if expecting something. He also became increasingly aware of her in ways that had nothing to do with work. The strength in her arms when she hefted a bag of grain, the way her braids swung when she walked, the sound of her laugh when one of the goats did something particularly foolish. She was beautiful in a way he had never considered before, a beauty born of competence and confidence and genuine kindness. He found himself looking forward to their evening meals, to the conversations that ranged from practical discussions of crop rotation to philosophical debates about the nature of honor and duty. It was dangerous territory, and Thomas knew it. Even if she felt something similar, which he had no reason to believe, there was no future in it. Humans and orcs did not form romantic attachments, not in any society that he knew of. Both species would view such a relationship with disgust and condemnation. Even here on the isolated frontier, they would face hostility from all sides, but knowing something was impossible did not stop his heart from betraying him. The first real test of his position as protector came on a cold evening in late autumn. Thomas was in the barn checking on a horse that had been favoring its left foreleg when he heard voices from the direction of the house. Multiple male voices, speaking loudly in the way of men who had been drinking and wanted everyone to know they were not afraid. He moved quickly to the barn door and saw 4 men on horseback in the yard, surrounding Grukka, who had emerged from the house with her crossbow held ready, but not yet aimed. "We are here on behalf of the Settlers Committee," one of them called out, a big man with a thick beard and an expensive coat. "There have been complaints about an orc squatting on claimed land. You need to move on, Greenskin." "This is my land," Grukka said steadily, her voice carrying clearly. "I filed a proper claim with the territorial office 3 years ago. I have the deed. I pay my levies. I am here legally." "The committee has reviewed your claim and found it invalid," the bearded man said, though his smirk suggested this was a lie. Orcs cannot own property in human territory. You have 1 week to vacate, or we will remove you by force. Thomas stepped out of the barn, walking with deliberate casualness into the yard. All 4 men turned to look at him, surprise evident on their faces. "Good evening, gentlemen," Thomas said pleasantly. "Can I help you with something?" "Who the hell are you?" the bearded man demanded. "I work here," Thomas said simply. "And I am fairly certain that the territorial law does not actually prohibit orc ownership, since I have seen orc names on the claim registry. So perhaps your committee needs to review their law books more carefully." "This is not your business, Drifter," another man said, younger and meaner looking. "Ride on if you know what is good for you." "I am afraid I cannot do that," Thomas said, his tone still friendly but his body language shifting subtly into a fighter's stance. "This is my employer's land, which makes it very much my business. You are trespassing and you have been asked to leave. I suggest you do so." The bearded man's face darkened. "You are taking the side of an orc over your own kind. That is disgusting. You are disgusting." "What is disgusting is 4 armed men showing up to threaten a woman living alone," Thomas said, letting steel enter his voice. "You are not here on any official business. You are here to bully and intimidate, and it is not going to work." "There are 4 of us," the young mean one said, his hand dropping to the sword at his belt. "I can count," Thomas said, "and I have fought worse odds against better fighters. But let me make this very simple for you. If you draw that weapon, I will assume you intend to kill me, and I will respond accordingly. And I promise you, at least 2 of you will die before I go down. Maybe 3. Maybe all 4 if I am having a good day. So you need to ask yourself if hassling this woman is worth dying for." The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut, all 4 men staring at Thomas and trying to assess whether he was bluffing. Thomas kept his expression calm and confident, drawing on every bit of his military training to project controlled menace. He was actually terrified, his heart pounding and his mouth dry, but he had learned long ago that most fights were won or lost before the first blow was struck. It was about who believed in their own strength more. Grukka had not moved, her crossbow still held ready, her amber eyes fixed on the confrontation. Thomas could feel her presence behind him, solid and reassuring, and he drew strength from knowing he was not alone. Finally, the bearded man jerked his horse's reins, pulling the animal back. "This is not over. The committee will hear about this and about you. You are making powerful enemies." "I have had powerful enemies before," Thomas said. "I am still here. They are not." The 4 men rode off, their horses' hooves loud in the evening quiet, and Thomas watched until they disappeared from view. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding, his hands shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. He turned to find Grukka lowering her crossbow, her expression troubled. "They will come back," she said quietly. "And next time they will bring more men. You should not have done that. You should not have made yourself a target for me." "Someone needed to stand up to them," Thomas said. "And I meant what I said. You gave me a place when I had nothing. I am not going to let a bunch of bullies drive you off your own land." "You could die for this," Grukka said, and there was something raw in her voice that made Thomas step closer. "We all die eventually," he said gently. "I would rather die standing for something I believe in than live knowing I abandoned someone who needed help. I have made that mistake before. I will not make it again." Grukka looked at him for a long moment, and Thomas saw a storm of emotions crossing her face. Then, to his complete surprise, she stepped forward and pulled him into a fierce hug. She was strong, her arms like iron bands around his ribs, and she smelled like herbs and wood smoke and earth. Thomas stood frozen for a heartbeat, then carefully returned the embrace, resting one hand on her back. "Thank you," Grukka said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Thank you for not being like them." "Thank you for not being like them either," Thomas said, and felt her laugh, a small vibration against his chest. She pulled back after a moment, and there was a brightness in her eyes that might have been tears. "Come inside. We should eat and make plans. If they are serious about this, we need to be ready." They spent the evening discussing strategies and contingencies. Grukka showed Thomas her deed and other papers, all properly filed and officially stamped. The territorial office had accepted her claim and her fees without issue, and there was no legal basis for removing her. But as Thomas knew all too well, legality and justice were not always the same thing, especially on the frontier where enforcement was sporadic at best. "We need to make our position clear to the authorities," Thomas said. "Go to the territorial office, make sure they have recorded any threats, establish that you are a legitimate landowner being harassed, create an official record." "They will not listen to an orc," Grukka said bitterly. "They might listen to a former knight," Thomas said. "I still have my discharge papers. They show my rank and my service. I may be disgraced, but I am not a criminal and my word still carries some weight. Let me come with you to the office. Let me speak on your behalf." "You would do that." "I would do that," Thomas confirmed. "We go together, we present the facts, and we make it clear that any attempt to forcibly remove you will be met with resistance and will result in bloodshed. Make it more trouble than it is worth." Grukka nodded slowly. "The nearest office is in Copper Fork. 2 days' ride there and back." "Then we leave in the morning," Thomas said. "Can you leave the homestead for that long?" "I have before. The animals will be fine for a few days with extra food and water." Grukka paused, then added, "I am glad you are here, Thomas. I do not think I could face this alone." "You are not alone," Thomas said, meeting her eyes. "Not anymore." They left at dawn, riding Grukka's 2 horses and carrying the deed and other legal documents in a saddlebag. The journey to Copper Fork was quiet but not uncomfortable, the 2 of them riding side by side through the autumn landscape. Thomas found himself very aware of Grukka's presence, the easy way she sat her horse, the alertness with which she scanned their surroundings. She was a capable woman, strong and smart and resilient, and he felt a surge of anger at the injustice of people trying to drive her away simply because of her species. They reached Copper Fork by late afternoon and went directly to the territorial office, a squat stone building that served as the administrative center for the frontier region. The clerk behind the desk looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed disgust when he saw Grukka. "What do you want?" he asked, not bothering with any greeting. "I am here to report harassment and threats against a legal landowner," Thomas said, stepping forward and placing Grukka's deed on the desk. "This woman holds a properly filed claim to a homestead near Stony Creek. Last night, 4 men showed up at her property claiming to represent a settlers' committee and demanding she vacate. They threatened violence if she did not comply within a week. I want this officially recorded." The clerk looked at the deed with obvious reluctance, then at Thomas. "And you are?" Thomas produced his discharge papers. "Former knight Thomas Jameson, formerly of the Crown's Eastern Guard. I am currently employed as security for this homestead, and I am here to ensure that the law is properly applied." The word knight did what Thomas hoped it would, adding a level of authority that the clerk could not completely ignore. The man's attitude shifted slightly, becoming more professional if not actually friendly. "The law does not prohibit orc land ownership," the clerk said slowly, reading the deed. "This claim appears to be in order. However, if there is a dispute regarding the original filing, that would need to be reviewed by the territorial magistrate." "There is no dispute," Thomas said firmly. There is intimidation and harassment by individuals who want to steal legally owned land. I want that on record. And I want it noted that any attempt to forcibly remove the legal owner will constitute assault and theft, and will be treated as such. The clerk looked unhappy, but pulled out a ledger and began writing. Names of the individuals making threats. Thomas provided descriptions of the 4 men, particularly the bearded one who seemed to be the leader. The clerk wrote it all down with obvious reluctance, then stamped the entry and slid the ledger around for Thomas to sign as a witness. "This is recorded," the clerk said. "But I will tell you plainly, a lot of people around here do not like having orcs settling on frontier land. You make enemies doing this. I have made peace with that," Thomas said, "as long as the law is clear." They left the office and found lodging for the night at a small inn on the edge of town. The innkeeper was not happy about renting to an orc, but Thomas paid double the usual rate, and that overcame his objections. They took a room with 2 beds, basic but clean, and went down to the common room for dinner. The atmosphere in the common room shifted noticeably when they entered, conversations stopping and hostile eyes following their progress to a corner table. Thomas kept his expression neutral, but he positioned himself with his back to the wall and Grukka beside him rather than across, a protective arrangement that did not go unnoticed. They ate quickly and in silence, neither wanting to provoke a confrontation, and returned to their room as soon as they finished. "I hate this," Grukka said once they were safely behind a locked door. "Hate being looked at like I am a monster. Hate having to justify my existence." "I know," Thomas said quietly, "and I am sorry you have to deal with it, but you handled yourself with dignity and we accomplished what we needed to. The threats are on record now." "Will it matter?" Grukka asked, and the weariness in her voice cut at Thomas's heart. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it is better than nothing, and you are not facing this alone." Grukka looked at him, really looked at him, with an intensity that made Thomas's breath catch. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me. We have only been living on the same homestead for a few weeks. Why are you willing to risk so much?" Thomas considered his answer carefully, knowing that what he said next mattered more than almost anything he had ever said. "Because you are a good person who deserves to live in peace. Because standing up for what is right matters, even when it is hard. And because somewhere along the way you stopped being just my employer and became my friend. I protect my friends." "Is that all I am?" Grukka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your friend?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Thomas knew he should lie, should keep things simple and safe. But he had spent his entire life in service to institutions that demanded he suppress his own judgment and conscience, and he was done with that. He was done with pretending and denying truth. "No," he said honestly. "You are more than that. You have been more than that for a while now, and I have been trying not to acknowledge it because it is complicated and impossible and would cause problems for both of us. But since you asked, no. You are not just my friend." Grukka stood very still, her amber eyes wide and startled. "Thomas, I know all the reasons why this is a terrible idea," Thomas said quickly, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know that humans and orcs do not form romantic attachments. I know that we would face condemnation from everyone. I know that I am a disgraced knight with nothing to offer you except hard work and protection. I know all of that. But I also know that you are the kindest, strongest, most admirable person I have met in years, and I care about you. More than I should, more than is probably wise." "You are right," Grukka said, and Thomas felt his heart sink. "It is complicated and impossible. My clan would see it as the ultimate betrayal. Human society would view us with disgust. We would be outcasts from both our peoples." "I understand," Thomas said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "I should not have said anything. I will not mention it again." "I did not say I wanted you to stop," Grukka interrupted, and now there was color rising in her green cheeks. "I said it was complicated and impossible. But so is an orc woman trying to farm alone on the frontier, and I am doing that. So is a knight refusing orders to slaughter innocents, and you did that. Maybe we are both used to doing impossible things." Hope sparked in Thomas's chest, fragile but bright. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think about you more than I should too," Grukka said, the words coming haltingly as if she was unsure how to express them. "I am saying that I look forward to our dinners together, to our conversations, to working beside you. I am saying that when those men threatened me, my first thought was fear that you would be hurt defending me, because somewhere along the way you became important. Very important." "Grukka," Thomas breathed, stepping closer. "But we need to be smart about this," she continued, holding up a hand. "We cannot be open about any feelings we might have. The world is not ready for that, and we would both suffer for it. If we are going to explore this, whatever this is, we do it privately. We do it carefully." "Agreed, agreed," Thomas said without hesitation. "I do not need the world to know. I just need to know if this is real, if I am not imagining that you might feel something similar to what I feel." "It is real," Grukka said softly. "I do not fully understand it, and it terrifies me, but it is real." They stood there looking at each other, neither quite sure what to do next. Thomas had been in battles, had faced death and danger, but this moment felt more significant and more frightening than any of that. Finally, slowly, he reached out and took Grukka's hand. Her skin was warm, her palms slightly rough from work, and her fingers curled around his with surprising gentleness. "We will figure this out," Thomas said. "Whatever it means, whatever it becomes, we will figure it out together." "Together," Grukka echoed, and the word felt like a promise. They did not kiss that night, both of them too uncertain and overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had admitted. But they sat together on one of the beds, holding hands and talking quietly until exhaustion claimed them. They slept in their separate beds, but when Thomas woke in the middle of the night, he could hear Grukka's breathing in the darkness and felt less alone than he had in months. The ride back to the homestead the next day felt different, charged with new awareness and possibility. They talked more easily, laughing about small things, sharing observations about the landscape and the weather. Thomas caught Grukka looking at him several times with an expression that made his heart race, and he knew she caught him doing the same. When they arrived home, everything looked undisturbed, the animals healthy and the buildings intact. They fell back into their work routine, but now there was an additional layer to every interaction. Thomas found himself making excuses to work near Grukka, to brush against her when they passed in the barn, to catch her eye across the dinner table. She did the same, her touches lingering a fraction longer than necessary, her smiles more frequent and warmer. A week passed with no sign of the men who had threatened them, and Thomas began to hope that the official recording had been enough to deter further harassment. Then one evening, as they sat down to dinner, Grukka stiffened and turned her head toward the eastern window. "Someone is coming," she said quietly. "Multiple riders, moving fast." Thomas was on his feet immediately, grabbing the sword he had purchased in Copper Fork with some of his saved wages. It was not a knightly blade, just functional steel, but it was sharp and well-balanced. Grukka took up her crossbow and they moved to the door together, stepping out into the yard as 7 horsemen came thundering up the path. The bearded man from before was in the lead, and he had brought reinforcements. Thomas recognized the younger mean one, and there were 5 others he had never seen. All were armed, several carrying torches despite the fact that it was not yet full dark. "Last chance," the bearded man called out. "Leave now, or we burn you out." "This is legal property and you are trespassing," Thomas called back. "Your threats have been officially recorded at the territorial office. Any violence you commit here will be prosecuted." "There is no law out here except what we make," the bearded man said. "And we say no orcs on our land." "It is not your land," Grukka said, her voice steady despite the odds. "It is mine, earned and paid for, and I will defend it." "Then you will die defending it," the bearded man said and gestured to his companions. "Burn the barn. If they try to stop you, kill them." The riders started to move forward, and Thomas knew they were out of options. He could not fight 7 armed men, not even with Grukka's help. They would be overrun in seconds, and then everything would be lost. He was trying to calculate their chances, trying to figure out if they could retreat to the house and barricade themselves inside, when a new voice rang out across the yard. "Stop where you are." Everyone turned to see a group of riders emerging from the tree line to the east. 8 orcs on horseback, all armed with bows and spears. They rode with military precision, forming a line between the homestead and the threatening humans, and the lead rider was a female orc with intricate braids and armor that marked her as someone of rank. "This is claimed orc land," the lead rider said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Registered and recognized. Any attack on this homestead is an act of war against the eastern clans. Is that what you want? War?" The bearded man had gone pale, his bravado evaporating in the face of actual armed opposition. "We did not know this land was under clan protection." "Your ignorance is not an excuse," the lead rider said coldly. "Leave now. Spread the word that this homestead and its occupants are under our protection. Anyone who threatens them threatens all of us. Go, before I decide that your presence here has already crossed the line." The 7 men turned their horses and rode away fast, the torches dropped and forgotten in the dirt. Thomas watched them go with a mixture of relief and confusion, then turned to face the orc riders who had just saved them. The lead rider dismounted and walked toward them, and Thomas saw Grukka's face transform with shock and joy. "Raka," Grukka said, her voice breaking. "Sister." "Hello, little sister," the lead rider said, pulling off her helmet to reveal features similar to Grukka's but harder, more weathered. "I heard you were in trouble. Did you think I would not come?" Grukka rushed forward and embraced her sister fiercely, both of them speaking rapidly in their own language. Thomas stood awkwardly to the side, still processing what had just happened. The other orc riders remained mounted, watching him with wary curiosity but no hostility. Finally, Grukka and her sister broke apart, and Grukka turned to Thomas with tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, this is my sister Raka. She leads a warrior band for the eastern clans." "Raka, this is Thomas Jameson. He is the reason I am still alive. He stood against those men to defend me." Raka studied Thomas with intense amber eyes that were almost identical to Grukka's. "You are the disgraced knight she mentioned in her message." "Message?" Thomas asked, confused. "I sent word to Raka after the first threat," Grukka admitted. "I did not know if she would receive it or if she would care, given how we parted, but I had to try." "You are my sister," Raka said simply. "We disagreed about your choices, but that does not mean I would abandon you to die. When your message reached me, I gathered warriors I trusted and rode immediately." She turned back to Thomas. "You have our gratitude, human. Not many of your kind would defend an orc at such risk to yourself." "Grukka is worth defending," Thomas said simply. Raka's eyes sharpened with interest, and Thomas realized he had revealed more in that simple statement than he intended. She looked between him and Grukka, and something calculating crossed her face. "I see," she said slowly. "Well, we need to talk, all of us. May we camp here tonight?" We have traveled far and our horses need rest." "Of course," Grukka said quickly. "Use the pasture by the creek. There is good grass and water there, and please join us for dinner. I have stew enough for everyone." The evening that followed was surreal for Thomas. He found himself sitting at Grukka's table surrounded by orc warriors, eating and listening to conversation that flowed between the human common language and the orcish tongue he did not understand. Grukka asked him questions about his background, his training, his reasons for being at the homestead, and Thomas answered honestly. He could feel her assessing him, weighing his worth and his intentions. After the meal, Grukka asked to speak with Grukka privately, and the two sisters walked out into the night together. Thomas cleaned up from dinner with the help of one of the other warriors, a younger orc named Gorak who spoke limited human common but seemed friendly enough. When the sisters returned, Grukka's expression was thoughtful and Grukka's was carefully neutral. "We have matters to discuss," Grukka announced to her warriors. "You may rest for the night. We leave at dawn." The warriors filed out, heading to their camp by the creek, and Grukka turned to Thomas. "Grukka has told me about your situation, about what you have become to each other." Thomas felt his stomach drop, unsure how the orc warrior would react to the knowledge that he and her sister had feelings for each other. But Grukka's expression was not angry, just serious. "In orc culture, strength and loyalty are valued above all else," Grukka said. "You have demonstrated both. You stood against 7 armed men to protect my sister, knowing you would likely die. That speaks to your character. You also refused orders you believed were unjust, sacrificing your position and status for your principles. That speaks to your honor." "Thank you," Thomas said carefully, unsure where this was leading. "Grukka has chosen to live apart from our people, and that is her right," Grukka continued. "But she is still of the clans, still my blood. What affects her affects all of us. The protection I offered tonight was not just words. I meant it. This homestead is now under the protection of the eastern clans. Any attack on it will be treated as an attack on our territory." "That is an incredible gift," Thomas said, looking at Grukka whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because my sister is happy here, happier than she ever was with the clan," Grukka said simply. "Because she has built something good and it should be protected. And because—" She paused, looking between them, because if a human and an orc can find common ground, can build something together despite everything working against them, then perhaps there is hope for the rest of us. Perhaps the cycle of violence can be broken. You would accept us?" Grukka asked, her voice trembling. "You would not condemn my feelings for him." "I do not fully understand it," Grukka admitted, "but I see how you look at him and how he looks at you. I see the way you work together, the life you have built. And I remember that you argued for peace, for trying to find another way. Maybe you were right. Maybe this is another way." Grukka crossed to her sister and hugged her again, and this time Thomas could hear her crying openly. Grukka held her sister and looked at Thomas over Grukka's shoulder, her expression fierce. "Hurt her, and I will hunt you across this entire continent," she said conversationally. "Betray her, and you will learn what orc vengeance truly means. But protect her, honor her, and you will have an ally for life." "Understood, understood," Thomas said, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I would die before I let harm come to her." "Good," Grukka said and smiled, an expression that transformed her stern features into something warmer. "Then we understand each other." The warriors departed at dawn as promised, but before they left, Grukka gave Grukka a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was a banner, a woven flag bearing the symbol of the eastern clans, a stylized mountain peak with a crescent moon above it. "Fly this from your gate post," Grukka instructed. "Let everyone who approaches see that you are under clan protection. It should prevent most trouble, and if it does not, send word immediately. We will come. Thank you, Grukka said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for not abandoning me. You are my sister, Raka said again, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. She turned to Thomas and extended her arm in the warrior's greeting. Thomas clasped her forearm, feeling the strength in her grip. Take care of her, knight. She is precious. I will, Thomas promised. With my life. The riders left, disappearing into the morning mist, and Thomas helped Grukka attach the banner to the gate post as instructed. The symbol fluttered in the breeze, visible from a good distance, a clear statement of protection and belonging. They stood together looking at it, Grukka's hand finding Thomas's and squeezing tightly. Everything has changed, she said quietly. For the better, I hope, Thomas replied. Definitely for the better, Grukka agreed, and when she turned to look at him, there was such warmth in her eyes that Thomas felt his breath catch. I never thought I would have my sister's acceptance. Never thought I could have both the life I built and connection to my family. But now. Now you have both, Thomas finished. And you have me if you still want that. I want that, Grukka said, stepping closer. I want you, I want this, all of it. Thomas cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. May I kiss you? Yes, Grukka breathed, and Thomas closed the distance between them. The kiss was sweet and tentative, both of them uncertain but willing. Grukka's tusks made the angle slightly awkward, but Thomas adjusted and found it endearing rather than strange. She tasted like the tea she had drunk at breakfast, herbs and honey, and when she made a small sound of pleasure, Thomas felt it all the way to his soul. They broke apart after a moment, both breathing hard, and Thomas rested his forehead against hers. That was. Grukka started, then laughed. I do not have words. Neither do I, Thomas admitted, but I would very much like to do it again. Later, Grukka said, though she sounded reluctant. We have work to do. The wheat needs checking and the goats need to be moved to the south pasture. Always practical, Thomas teased gently. Someone has to be, Grukka retorted, but she was smiling. Tonight, after dinner, we can continue this conversation. I will count the minutes, Thomas said, and was rewarded with a light punch to his shoulder and another of those radiant smiles. The days that followed were among the happiest of Thomas's life. The work was still hard, the frontier was still dangerous, but he faced it all alongside someone who had become infinitely precious to him. They were careful about public displays of affection, aware that even with clan protection, their relationship would invite hostility if it became widely known. But in the privacy of the homestead, they allowed themselves to explore their growing feelings. Thomas learned that Grukka loved to be read to, though she could read perfectly well herself, because she enjoyed the sound of his voice. He read to her in the evenings from the few books she owned, histories and farming manuals, and one battered collection of poetry. Grukka taught him phrases in her language, laughing at his pronunciation but pleased by his effort. She told him stories of orc culture, the festivals and traditions, the complex social structures of the clans. He told her about his childhood in a small village, his training as a knight, the battles he had fought and the doubts he had carried. They kissed often now, stealing moments between chores, lingering over good-night farewells. Thomas discovered that Grukka was surprisingly romantic, despite her practical nature, that she loved small gestures of affection. He left wildflowers on her pillow, fixed the squeaky hinge on her favorite cabinet without being asked, made sure her tea was always the right temperature. She mended his clothes with careful stitches, made his favorite foods, always checked that he was warm enough in the barn loft before retiring to her own bed. The physical attraction between them grew steadily, but they both held back from taking that final step, some unspoken agreement that such intimacy required more certainty, more commitment. Thomas wanted to do right by Grukka, to honor her properly, but he was not sure what that meant in the context of their unusual situation. Marriage was the traditional human approach, but could a human and an orc even legally marry? And would she want that? The answer came unexpectedly one evening as they sat together by the fire, Thomas reading while Grukka worked on mending a torn sack. She set down her work and looked at him with unusual seriousness. "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Of course," Thomas said, setting down the book and giving her his full attention. "What do you see for our future?" Grukka asked. "Is this just something pleasant for now, or do you imagine something more permanent?" Thomas took a breath, knowing this was important. "I imagine something permanent. I imagine spending years working this land with you, building something that lasts. I imagine growing old together, whatever that looks like. I love you, Grukka. I know it has only been a few months, but I love you, and I want a life with you if you will have me." Grukka's eyes had gone wide. "You love me." "I love you," Thomas confirmed. "I probably have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you would not feel the same or that it would complicate things. But you asked for honesty, so there it is. I love you." "I love you too," Grukka said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible about this, but I cannot help it. I love you, Thomas Jameson. You are good and kind and honorable, and you make me happy in ways I did not know I could be happy." Thomas crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks. Grukka responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, and when they finally broke apart, they were both trembling. "In orc culture, there is a bonding ceremony," Grukka said breathlessly. "It is not like human marriage, but it serves the same purpose. Two people commit to each other before witnesses, exchange tokens, and are recognized as bonded mates. It is binding for life. Is that what you want?" Thomas asked. "To bond with me?" "Yes," Grukka said without hesitation. "But I do not know if it would be recognized by human law. I do not know if we could have both orc bonding and human marriage." "I do not care about human law," Thomas said fiercely. "I am not exactly in good standing with human society anyway. If you want a bond in the orc tradition, then that is what we will do. That is all I need." "We would need witnesses," Grukka said. "Traditionally, family or clan members. I could send word to Raka." "Let's do it," Thomas said. "Let's make this official, make it real. I do not want to wait any more." The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Grukka sent a message to her sister explaining their intentions and requesting her presence as witness. Raka's response came swiftly, expressing surprise but also support, and confirming that she would arrive with a small group for the ceremony. Grukka explained the orc bonding traditions to Thomas, the exchange of tokens that represented the strengths each partner brought to the union, the spoken vows, the ritual joining of hands bound with cord to symbolize their connection. Thomas spent his evenings carving a token for Grukka, a small wooden figure of a goat, because they had bonded over taking care of the herd, and because it made her laugh. Grukka wove him a bracelet from leather and colored thread, incorporating protective symbols from orc tradition. They spoke vows to each other alone one night under the stars, private promises before they made their public commitment. Raka arrived 3 days before the planned ceremony with 5 warriors, including Gorak, who greeted Thomas like an old friend. The group set up camp and helped with preparations, treating the upcoming bonding with the same seriousness they would afford any important clan ritual. Thomas found himself accepted among them with surprising ease, the warriors assessing him not by his species but by his actions and his evident devotion to Grukka. The ceremony itself was held at sunset on a cool autumn evening. They gathered in the main yard, the witnesses forming a circle around Thomas and Grukka. Grukka officiated, speaking first in Orcish and then translating to Common for Thomas's benefit. She talked about the sacred nature of bonding, the commitment to stand together against all challenges, the promise to honor and protect each other above all else. When it came time for vows, Thomas spoke first, his voice clear and steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Grukka, I stand before you with nothing but myself to offer. I have no rank, no title, no great wealth, but I offer you my strength to help shoulder your burdens. I offer you my loyalty, absolute and unwavering. I offer you my protection, my partnership, and my love for as long as I draw breath. You have given me purpose when I had none, hope when I felt lost, and a home when I had nowhere to belong. I pledge myself to you completely today and always. Grukka's eyes were streaming tears, but her voice was strong when she responded. Thomas, I stand before you as an outcast who found her way by leaving everything she knew. You could have kept walking when you found my notice. You could have left when danger came. But you stayed, and you fought for me, and you loved me even when it would have been easier not to. I offer you my partnership in building the life we both want. I offer you my trust, hard-earned and freely given. I offer you my love, fierce and true. You are my chosen, my mate, my home. I pledge myself to you completely today and always. Grukka bound their hands together with a ceremonial cord, red and black threads twisted together, and pronounced them bonded in the sight of the clan and the spirits. The witnesses raised their voices in a traditional Orcish blessing, the sounds rising into the darkening sky, and Thomas felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was real. This was forever. They feasted that night, the warriors producing supplies they had brought specifically for the celebration. There was roasted meat and fresh bread, honeycakes and strong drink, and music played on orc drums and flutes. Thomas danced with Grukka in the firelight, awkward and joyful, while the warriors clapped and sang. Grukka pulled him aside at one point, her expression serious but warm. You are clan now, she said simply. Not by birth but by bonding. You are under our protection and you have our support. Remember that. I will, Thomas said, moved beyond words. Thank you for everything. Thank my sister, Grukka said with a slight smile. She is the one who saw something worth keeping in a disgraced night. I just followed her lead. The warriors stayed 2 more days, helping with final preparations for winter, reinforcing the clan banner's message by their visible presence. When they finally departed, Grukka embraced both Thomas and Grukka, making them promise to send word if they needed anything. Then the riders were gone, and Thomas and Grukka were alone together, properly bonded and ready to face whatever came next. That night, they made love for the first time in Grukka's bed, the barn loft finally abandoned for the comfort of the house. It was tender and awkward and perfect, both of them learning each other with patience and care. Grukka was strong but gentle, her touch reverent as she explored Thomas's body, and Thomas took his time learning what made her gasp and shiver. When they finally came together, it felt like a natural extension of everything they had already built, another layer of intimacy and connection. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Grukka's head on Thomas's chest and his arms wrapped around her. I never imagined this, Grukka said quietly. Never thought I could have this kind of happiness. Neither did I, Thomas admitted. When they broke my sword, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered, but I was wrong. I had just lost the things that did not actually matter. This, you, us together, this is what matters. This is everything. We will face challenges, Grukka said. People will not accept us. We will always be outsiders. Then we will be outsiders together, Thomas said simply. You and me against the world if necessary. I have learned that belonging to yourself and to someone you love is worth more than belonging to any institution or society that demands you compromise your principles. When did you become so wise? Grukka teased gently. When I met an orc farmer who taught me what real courage looks like, Thomas replied, and Grukka laughed, the sound vibrating through both their bodies. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and Thomas slept more peacefully than he had since his childhood. Winter came to the frontier with sharp teeth and bitter winds, but the homestead was ready. Thomas and Grukka worked together to ensure all the animals had adequate shelter, that firewood was stacked high, that the stores of food were sufficient. The wheat they had planted grew slowly through the cold months, and they spent the shorter days working on indoor projects, repairing tools, mending equipment, planning for spring expansion. The clan banner at their gate proved to be an effective deterrent. A few travelers passed by, and while some looked at the symbol with obvious unease, none caused trouble. Word had apparently spread that the orc homestead was under clan protection, and that attacking it would bring swift retaliation. Thomas and Grukka occasionally made trips to Copper Fork for supplies, enduring the hostile stares but completing their business without incident. The territorial clerk who had recorded the original threats greeted them with thinly veiled distaste, but kept his comments to himself, clearly aware that the situation had evolved beyond simple intimidation. Thomas discovered that bonded life suited him remarkably well. He loved waking up beside Grukka, loved the domestic routines they had established, loved the sense of building something meaningful together. Grukka seemed equally content, often humming while she worked, her smiles coming more easily and frequently. They settled into their relationship with surprising naturalness, learning each other's moods and needs, supporting each other through difficult days and celebrating small victories together. In late winter, Grukka realized she was pregnant. The revelation came one morning when she was sick for the third day in a row, and the truth could no longer be avoided. Thomas felt a complex swirl of emotions, joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. They knew nothing about human orc offspring, whether such children were even possible, what to expect or how to prepare. We should send word to Raka, Grukka said, her hand resting protectively over her still flat belly. She will know what to do, or at least who to ask. Thomas sent the message that same day, riding to Copper Fork and paying a trusted courier to carry it to the eastern clan territories. The response came 2 weeks later, Raka herself riding to the homestead with a healer named Makra, an older orc woman with sharp eyes and gentle hands. Human orc children are rare but not unheard of, Makra explained after examining Grukka thoroughly. The pregnancy will proceed mostly as an orc pregnancy would, perhaps slightly shorter in duration. The child will likely favor the mother's traits, but there is no way to know for certain until birth. You must eat well, rest when needed, and avoid heavy lifting in the later months. Will the child be healthy? Grukka asked, the worry evident in her voice. There is no reason to think otherwise, Makra said kindly. Mixed children are often strong, inheriting the best traits of both parents. You are young and healthy, and your mate is devoted. These are all good things. I will return in a few months to check on your progress. Raka stayed for 3 days, helping with chores and spending long hours talking with her sister. On the night before she was to leave, she pulled Thomas aside for a private conversation. My sister is about to bear a child who will be rejected by both our peoples, Raka said bluntly. Human society will see the child as tainted, an abomination. Many orcs will see it the same way. Your child will face prejudice and hatred simply for existing. Are you prepared for that? No, Thomas said honestly. But I will do everything in my power to protect our child and give them a good life. We will face whatever comes together. You will need more than good intentions, Grukka said. You will need strength, resources, allies. The clan will support you, but you cannot rely solely on us. You need to build a network here, connections with humans who will see past their prejudices. It will be difficult, but it is essential. I know, Thomas said. I have been thinking about it. There must be others out here on the frontier who value justice over tradition, who judge people by their character rather than their species. I will find them. Good, Grukka said, because I will not let my sister's child grow up in isolation, cut off from the world. That child deserves a future, a real one, and you and Grukka deserve support. Thomas took her words to heart. After Grukka and Makra departed, he began making more frequent trips to the settlements, not just for supplies but to establish relationships. He sought out people who seemed fair-minded, who treated Grukka with basic courtesy when they encountered her, who did not immediately join in the general hostility. He found a merchant named Samuel who valued Grukka's cheese and vegetables enough to maintain a respectful business relationship. He found a blacksmith named Martha who was willing to discuss metallurgy and trade work without bringing species into it. Slowly, carefully, he built a network of people who might be willing to extend basic human decency to his family. Spring came, and with it renewed activity. Grukka's pregnancy was showing now, her belly round and pronounced, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman carrying precious cargo. Thomas took over the heavier tasks, refusing to let her risk herself or the baby. They planted the fields together, Thomas doing the digging and planting while Grukka directed and planned. The wheat from the previous fall's planting came in beautifully, their first real cash crop, and Thomas sold it in Copper Fork for a price that would keep them comfortable for months. The baby was born on a warm summer evening with Makra in attendance, having arrived 3 days earlier to wait out the final stages. Thomas paced outside the house while his wife labored, terrified and exhilarated by turns. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and loud and healthy, he nearly collapsed with relief. Makra emerged an hour later, smiling broadly. "A son," she announced. "Both mother and child are healthy. Go meet your boy." Thomas entered the bedroom to find Grukka propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. The baby was undeniably a mix of both parents, his skin a lighter green than Grukka's, his features more delicate but with small developing tusks just visible. He had Thomas's blue eyes and Grukka's dark hair, and when Thomas carefully took him in his arms, the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You're perfect." "Our son," Grukka said, her voice filled with wonder. "Our family." They named him Terran, a name that worked in both human and orc languages, a bridge between worlds just as he was. Grukka arrived a week later to perform the traditional orc blessing ceremony for newborns, formally welcoming Terran into the clan and granting him all the protections that came with membership. It was a significant gesture, a clear statement that the Eastern clans recognized this mixed child as one of their own. Terran grew quickly, healthy and curious, his laughter filling the homestead with new joy. Thomas discovered depths of love he had not known existed, the fierce protective devotion of a parent for a child. He watched Grukka with their son and fell in love with her all over again, amazed by her strength and tenderness as a mother. They adapted their routines to accommodate Terran's needs, taking turns with nighttime feedings and daily care, supporting each other through the exhausting early months of parenthood. The network Thomas had been building proved its worth when Taryn was 6 months old. A traveling priest came through Copper Fork, spreading rhetoric about the evil of mixed unions and calling for expulsion of all orcs from frontier territories. Some in the settlements were receptive to his message, and Thomas heard rumors of a renewed effort to drive Grukka out. But Samuel the merchant and Martha the blacksmith and several others spoke up publicly, arguing that Grukka was a legitimate landowner who caused no problems and produced quality goods that benefited everyone. The territorial clerk, perhaps remembering the official recording from years earlier, confirmed that Grukka's claim was legal and protected. The priest moved on to stir up trouble elsewhere, and the immediate threat passed. "We will always face this," Grukka said one evening, watching Taryn sleep peacefully in his cradle. "People who hate us for existing." "Probably," Thomas agreed. "But we also have allies now, people who will speak up for us, who recognize that we are just trying to live our lives. That matters." "It does," Grukka said, leaning against him. "I just want Taryn to grow up safe, to have opportunities, to not be defined solely by what he is." "He'll be defined by who he is," Thomas said firmly. "And we will make sure he grows up knowing he is loved, that he comes from strength on both sides, that he has value regardless of what anyone else thinks. That is what we can give him." The years passed, each season bringing its own challenges and rewards. The homestead prospered, growing from a barely sustainable farm into a genuinely productive operation. They added more animals, expanded the fields, built a second barn. Taryn grew into a bright, active child who loved helping with chores and hearing stories about both human and orc cultures. Thomas taught him to read and write, to handle tools, to understand the basics of self-defense. Grukka taught him farming, cooking, the orc language and customs. He grew up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable in his mixed heritage, because his parents made sure he saw it as a strength rather than a flaw. When Taryn was 5, Grukka became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt less frightening and more exciting. Their daughter Sira was born in winter, healthy and beautiful, with her mother's green skin and her father's facial structure. Taryn was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, and the homestead rang with children's voices and laughter. Raka visited regularly, her initial skepticism about the human-orc bonding long since transformed into genuine support and affection. She brought gifts from the clan, news of larger political developments, and her own fierce love for her sister's family. Other clan members began stopping by occasionally, curious about the mixed family, and usually leaving impressed by what Thomas and Grukka had built. Some orcs from other clans, facing similar isolation or rejection, began seeking out the homestead for advice or simply to see proof that such a life was possible. Thomas and Grukka found themselves becoming inadvertent symbols, evidence that humans and orcs could find common ground, could build lives together, could create something beautiful out of what others saw as impossible. It was not a role they had sought, but they accepted it with grace, welcoming visitors and sharing their story honestly, including the difficulties and the discrimination they still faced. The human community's attitude toward them evolved slowly, driven less by sudden enlightenment and more by gradual familiarity and economic incentives. Grukka's products were simply the best available, and refusing to trade with her meant inferior goods. Taryn and Sira, as they grew, were living proof that mixed children were not monsters but simply children, no different from any others in the ways that mattered. Thomas's consistent fairness in his dealings, his willingness to help neighbors when needed, His obvious devotion to his family, all of it slowly eroded the worst of the prejudice. There were still problems, still incidents of harassment and hostility. But there were also moments of connection and acceptance that would have seemed impossible in those early days. A human farmer who had always been coldly polite invited them to a harvest festival. A teacher in Copper Fork asked if Taryn might attend the local school, arguing that all children deserved education regardless of heritage. Small victories, each one hard-won, but they accumulated into something meaningful. Thomas never regretted his choice, never looked back on his life as a knight with longing. He had found something far more valuable than rank or status. He had found purpose, love, family, and a home built on principles he actually believed in. The broken sword that once represented his shame had instead freed him to become the man he was meant to be. One evening, years after that first desperate arrival at the homestead, Thomas sat on the porch with Grukka watching the sun set over their land. Taryn was in the barn checking on the animals, taking his responsibilities seriously as he always did. Sira was inside practicing her letters, her small tongue poking out in concentration. The fields were planted, the animals were healthy, and the clan banner still flew over the gate. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this all is?" Grukka asked, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder. "Everything that had to happen for us to find each other, for this family to exist, all the time," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "If I had not refused those orders, if you had not posted that notice, if either of us had been just slightly different people, none of this would exist." "I am glad we are who we are," Grukka said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything." "It did not cost me everything," Thomas corrected gently. "It cost me the wrong things so I could find the right ones. I traded armor and rank for love and purpose. That is the best exchange I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Taryn emerged from the barn and waved to them, and Thomas waved back, his heart full to bursting with contentment and gratitude. He had been stripped of his rank and his sword had been broken, left with nothing but himself and his principles. But those bare foundations had been enough to build a life worth living, a love worth keeping, and a family worth everything. The disgraced knight had found his purpose, and it had nothing to do with crowns or orders or glory. It was right here, in the daily work of the homestead, in the love of an orc woman who had taken a chance on him, in the laughter of children who represented a bridge between worlds, in the slow, patient building of a future that proved the cynics wrong. Thomas Jameson had lost his sword, but found something better. He had found his home,